Okay. No. I do this. Wow. All right. Hi, everyone. Should I wait for people to join or shall they just rewind?
Just come in,
All right. Welcome to my little dev seminar on PM and LO speeches in BP. What I'm going to cover is some techniques I think are helpful for both speakers. Then I'll talk about each role in turn, and then give some ideas on asking POIs in these roles to closing teams. So in terms of things I think are really good to do in both positions, the first thing to note is that in BP debating, the narrative of your case is like the key, because the judge is holding like 4 different cases in their head. They need to really clearly have some sort of imagery or idea, like big idea for what your case is about, so that they can kind of clearly compare it and kind of hold it in their head what it is. So I think for both speakers, you want to be really clear at the very start of your speech what your case is, what you're going to prove, and giving some really clear examples, illustrations, current events is a really good way to get that imagery going, to help certain types of judges remember it who aren't like super technically minded or struggle with a lot of detail. So I guess that means that in prep, you want to make sure that you are really brainstorming what kinds of imagery applies to your case, what kinds of current events link into what you're talking about. What are some really good hypothetical examples if you can't think of any of those other things. Make sure you're context setting right at the beginning, but also make sure you're context setting through each of your points. The second thing I think is applicable to both speakers is making sure you're future-proofing your case and your speeches, right? And what I mean by future-proofing is like protecting it from closing teams, attacking it. Obviously, you have very little ability to engage with them, but they have a lot of ability to engage with you. So what this means is when you are in your speech, when you're taking POIs, you should prioritize taking POIs from the closing teams, because this is the only opportunity you will have to respond directly to points from their speeches. So you should say, I'll take a POI from closing. You know, if opening offers a POI, say, is there one from closing? Like just really aggressively try to get them to offer one. They probably won't give you their case, but they might try to kind of test a proposition on you. So this goes on to the second point about POIs and your responses, is that you should think about, because obviously the strategy from closing is not to reveal your case, but to kind of put enough of the proposition to the speaker so that they give like a bad response to it and you can weaponize that in closing. So what you need to do at opening is make sure that you are trying to recognize what is the underlying proposition that the closing team is trying to put to me? What's the kind of principle underneath this example they're giving to me in the POI? Kind of like, where are they going with this POI? So for that reason, you don't just want to have your gut instinct response and like say whatever you immediately think off the cuff. This is a situation where when you're taking a POI from closing and you're opening, you actually really do want to do the like pause and think about it situation and give a really good comprehensive response. Again, at the end of the debate, when the judge is comparing closing team's case against your case, often the only responsive material you will have is the direct response you gave to that POI. So you should like really, really think about how you answer that POI, give it a good response, chuck in a couple of mechanisms, like really give it some emphasis in your speech because it's the only direct engagement you'll get with closing. The second thing for future-proofing is making sure so that's like against the opposite diagonal closing team. Weighing is more against like your own closing team and how to beat them. You want to be weighing a lot in your speeches, which is different from 3v3 in the amount that you're weighing, but also different from 3v3 in the like way that you're weighing, because you're not saying like this point is more important than the other side's point. You're kind of saying why this point is important generally, or like in the debate as a whole, or more important than any other point that could possibly be raised in this debate. So you want to be kind of answering like, why is this the most important thing to prove in the debate generally? And you want to be trying to have that in all of your points and spend quite a significant amount of time on it to the extent that you can. That's obviously really different because in 3v3, first speakers don't really prioritize weighing because their second and third speakers kind of pick that up as they go down and they have more scope to kind of think about what's strategically the most important thing to weigh. But you should just be weighing like straight from the beginning, like giving some reasons for why that point is really important, why it defeats anything that could possibly come out of your closing, and also the classic weighing of like why it's more important than the other side. So what I'm going to do now is just go through some ideas for how you might make weighing or framing arguments. So the first thing is kind of like the classic type of weighing that you would do in 3v3 that's kind of like about people. Like this point, this impact affects a huge amount of people, the most amount of people, therefore is the most important point in the debate, therefore we win. You might say we help the most vulnerable group in the debate, or the debate the group that we have a duty to, so therefore we win the debate. You might be able to say, for example, if you think closing might try to prioritize a different stakeholder, or if your opposition is prioritizing a different stakeholder, that you help the particular group the most, because you might say, well, that other group is already being impacted, so you just kind of impact them a little bit more, but this group currently has nothing and we give them like everything, so therefore our point is the most important, etc., etc. That's probably pretty classic like weighing stuff, maybe not that last one. The next section is like meta weighing, or like about the debate itself. This is the stuff that's kind of new to BP, because there's like literally no reason to talk about this kind of thing in 3v3 unless you're just waxing lyrical about the debate in general. So the first thing you might want to talk about is why your team has answered a key question in the debate. So if you've answered one of the most fundamental questions in the debate, you're more likely to win the debate over a team that like has a misky argument about a stakeholder or like proves some random principle, right? So if you kind of are able to prove why like the bad cases of the policy will always predominate over the good cases of the policy, then that's kind of like the fundamental question of the debate is like, is the policy good or bad? You can kind of say, well, we've proved this fundamental question. This is why it's the fundamental question. Here's why we win. But the other way it might be fundamental is that other impacts or other lines of argument rely on that thing being proved first. So for example, if you are the opening team and you prove that a policy is successful and will work, then any closing team that is like, here's the impact on a particular stakeholder, necessarily has to rely on your analysis that the policy will work. So you want to explain in your speech, like having explained that this, like the policy will be successful, and us being the team that's done that, any other extension that relies on this analysis like is derivative, it is like less important contribution than our contribution, and that's why we win over closing whatever they might run if it stems from this analysis. So it's another way you can kind of preemptively put yourself up over your closing team. The last thing under the like meta weighing is inherency or uniqueness. So you might try to say, well, your claim is kind of inherent in the motion or inherent in the policy, and everyone else's can be achieved in different ways. So teams might try to kind of like divert the policy to say they like solve some different problem. You can kind of be like, well, our case actually addresses like what the problem is that the policy is trying to solve, or it's like the policy is the only thing that can solve this problem. There's no other way to do it. You can do other resources on that other thing. So, you know, we're the most important case in the debate. The last thing on weighing, as I've noticed, which is a bit less vogue these days, but, you know, in certain debates, you might want to chuck in a bit of principles, moral framework. This is more like, these notes are kind of taken from closing, but I suppose if you were an opening and you really wanted to run a principled case, you would kind of try to explain why like consequences or utilitarianism is not the best way to adjudicate the debate. But it might also just be a case where like it's kind of a cross diagonal thing, right? So maybe your like policy is, you know, going to harm some people, or it's not going to help the most amount of people compared to the opposition, but there's some like principled obligation, like maybe there's like a treaty obligation or reparations or like some other principle that your case is relying on. Then you want to explain why the debate should be judged through the lens of this duty therefore locking in that lens which favors your case the most. And that's the same for like the second bullet point, which is just where there's two moral duties that are like competing against each other. So kind of making sure that you're explaining the framework for the debate as well as doing the debate itself. If you kind of win the framework in a way that's favorable to your case, will make it a lot harder for closing teams to shift that framework later on. That third bullet point, I think, is like a sub bullet point of the second one, which is that a way to explain principles is to talk about an analogous situation, explain what the moral intuition is on that situation, and explain why the current situation is analogous. So if you were doing a debate where you were supporting abortion, you might say, well, currently we accept the right to self-defense, explain why we morally like intuit that self-defense is a good thing that we should accept, then explain why it's analogous to abortion, and explain why that is also a morally good thing that we should accept. So you can kind of get the like moral framework sorted out at the beginning, which will make it harder for other teams to contest that moral framework later on. Okay. I suppose you can ask questions on the Facebook chat thingy, but I'm not sure. If I click on here, will it screen? Yeah, keep an eye on it. Let me know if there is any questions. I will gladly answer them. Okay, PM speeches. So first thing you want to do, and also continue throughout, is to just dominate the framing for the debate. And I talked about this a little bit earlier when I was talking about like the narrative and making sure you bring that imagery, but you really want to control the framework for the debate, control the imagery for the debate, control, you know, where we think the debate takes place, and just really make that clear. Because as soon as you are ambiguous on that, it will be weaponized by everyone else in the debate. It'll be weaponized by your opposition, saying, oh, they didn't think about this context. They kind of said it in a way that's more advantageous to them. It'll be weaponized by opposing, who are like, Gov wasn't specific about where this place, you know, where this takes place, what it's really about. We're going to bring the characterization that wins the debate. So you really need to make sure that you kind of lock in that framing and characterization, imagery, narrative, all of that sort of stuff that kind of packages the mechanisms that you're giving in the debate. And also when I kind of say the framework is like the perceived clash in the debate, this kind of overlaps into some of the other points, but making sure you are kind of setting up the debate as a whole, not just your case. So like thinking about what op needs to prove, how that's going to interact with your points, and then being preemptive and explaining why they can never prove those things. That also guards you against closing opposition. If you prove like why they can never prove that, you've done preemptive rebuttal to anything that CO can prove that is necessary to win the debate. So just be very aware of op. At one point, like when I was doing BP and I was PM and prep, I would actually think of like the op case first and then think about like how I would defeat the op case, like rather than thinking about what the gov points are. And I think just changing your mindset that way around can be helpful as long as you don't go like overboard and forget to have substantive material. Take POIs at PM is really hard because you're like on a roll and you want to like get out your case. But again, you have so little ability to engage at opening government with other teams. Like you can only respond to one speech in the entire debate. So take 2 POIs, take 1 from opening, 1 from closing, take 2 from closing, take 2 from closing, 1 from opening. I don't know, it's probably getting a bit far, but take POIs, really think about them, give good answers to them, and engage with them. And that will not only boost your speaker points and make you more likely to win. Be preemptive. The reason I say it won't be a waste of time is that often in 3v3 or other formats, sometimes when you're preemptive, you like just get the wrong case, like the team just runs a different case from what you were going to preempt and you've just run material that's irrelevant. That's far less likely to happen in BP when there's like 2 teams who have to kind of scrabble around for like 2 possible cases to run in the debate. So if you're preemptive and then like opening op has a different case, you've probably preempted what closing op was going to run. So really think about what is the op material that's available, how can I cut it out of the debate at PM, and just make it a huge hill for them to climb to start. Obviously, like tips from 3v3 apply to BP, like you want to be at PM, the same as at first. You want to be really clean, really structured, signpost really well, substructure your points really well. But I'm sure you've, had seminars on how to do a first speech. So I'm not going to reiterate how to do a first speech. The last thing in relation to PM speeches is that there needs to be this balance between depth and breadth in your speech. So you need to make sure that you do prove points sufficiently for them to stand in the debate and resist like a reasonable amount of rebuttal, right? But once you've done that, you want to go broad and kind of cover points such that your closing can't really like run them. Now, if there's a point that's like not that important in the debate, think about whether you really need to run it at first, because like basically if CG took that point, like made it into their case, could they actually beat your case with that case? And if they can't, you don't really need to like scorch them out. You may as well let them run that bad case and lose to you, right? Rather than squishing your speech up, making it really messy and saying like 5 points in like 30 seconds at the end of your speech. So just have that balance between depth and breadth, making sure those points are proved sufficiently, but making sure that you do cover and kind of cut out any closing cases that might arise from your gaps. All right. Is there any questions on the live stream? Nope. Move on to allo speeches. Again, I think you can kind of tell by now, I'm very passionate about the soft skills of debating. So I think one of the most important things you need to do at allo is redirect the vibe. PM's just given this very impassioned speech where they've probably done a lot of work setting up the context, trying to frame the debate, trying to give lots of examples, kind of give a certain emotion to the debate. Allo needs to come up and totally just, it's like, that's over, that's in the past. Now it's allo time, and I'm going to tell you what this debate is all about. So you really need to make sure that you don't get sucked into the PM characterization, get sucked into the framing. You need to be really cognizant of like, what do I actually need to contest that wasn't stuff they explicitly said, but kind of things they implied or ways they kind of painted things, and make sure you are pushing back against that and redirecting that vibe. Also make a strategic decision about whether you want to buy into the framework, i.e. like what the clashes are in the debate, or whether you want to contest it, because it can be strategic to buy into the framework, because if you accept the framework at LO, then like I say, in the last bullet point, you kind of like make the opening really clear, make it clash really well, make it really clean, really engaged, which means it's more likely to win over closing, because it's like a nice, clean, clear, well-engaged clash rather than like throwing mud at the bottom of the debate with the scraps that are left. In terms of the second bullet point, make sure that you give broad and strong, but not necessarily deep rebuttal. So I think you need to give broad rebuttal, because you need to make sure that it is covering all of the gov points. If you don't respond to a gov point, CO can respond to a gov point and win the debate by having a rebuttal extension. So you need to make sure that you give a strong point to them. But if you give really deep rebuttal to everything that gov says, then your speech will be twice as long as theirs, and you wouldn't have covered any of your own material. So you need to make sure that you think of what is the strongest piece of rebuttal or two pieces of rebuttal I can give to this, and give those pieces, and let your second speaker develop what needs to be developed in terms of where the DPM pivots in terms of the strength of their case. So yeah, make sure it's comprehensive, but don't go overboard spending a lot of time doing rebuttal, especially because there's so much, because the PM speech has probably been so broad, there's so much scope for the other team to pivot. So they can just pivot to whatever was like not rebutted in depth, and then beat you. Third thing is make sure the responses are very charitable. If the PM is crap, gives a really crap case, and you're like, oh, that was terrible, and you give really crap, really surface level responses, then, two things can happen to you. Either the DPM gets up and gives really good versions of the points and you've got less time to respond to them, but more likely is that the closing teams just have like a better version of the opening debate and beat you because you gave really crap responses. Your closing beats you and the diagonal team beats you as well. So you kind of need to build up like what possibly could be the best version of the point. If, you know, imagining if the DPM or the closing government's going to come up and actually make it good and then respond to it like that. And it can be hard to kind of be tactful about like how you're going to actually physically say that. I think you can kind of be like, I presume what, you know, where the gov team is going with this is da-da-da, and here's the response to it. Or like, I don't know, or you could just ignore that it was put really badly and say like the gov team told you broadly this and then respond to it. So you don't want to like build up their point and make it sound better than it was. Like you want to be clear that it was made badly, but you are being charitable, and make that clear to the judge. The last thing specifically to LO is to try to do as much integration of rebuttal as possible. You really don't want to have like a separate rebuttal section and then a substantive case, because you've done all this work redirecting the vibe, and then you go straight back to the PM speech and give all this kind of short, sharp, strong but not deep rebuttal, and then move on to your case. You're kind of disrupting the flow, and you have less time to do your substantive speech because you inevitably run over time at the beginning of your speech. So it saves time to integrate it as much as possible, but again, it also makes the opening clash like way more developed immediately, which means that the DPM and the DLO can kind of really dig into that clash and kind of like resolve it, make it better, make it like more well argued, which means that the opening clash is more likely to be significant over closing. Yeah, I think that's all I was going to say about that. The way that I like to do that is just to like take the rebuttal, make sure the rebuttal is like on separate sheets of paper for like each piece of rebuttal. So when you're taking notes on the PM, like just kill paper, write all of their points on different pieces of paper, and you can just chuck the ones that are accidentally repetitive or whatever, and just slot that at the back of your point. So you can just make your entire point, then say, you know, Gov has told you in relation to this, or this clashes with the Gov point that blah, blah, blah. Here's my response to it. Here's my big, huge weighing of why this point is so important, and this response is so important, why we win the debate. So just in terms of practical, sometimes it's too hard to like write it into your little framework of your point that you've got on your one piece of paper. Just chuck it at the back, like at least it's like within that point rather than at the front, even if it's like a little bit awkwardly at the back of the point. Okay, last thing is about asking POIs to the closing teams. So you're probably only going to be able to give one POI realistically to the closing teams. Like theoretically, and under good faith debating, you should get two, but you're not. Probably the member is going to take a POI and the whip is not going to take a POI. So you need to make the POI like really good. Like you need to be able to win the debate with your POI. And this is a really, you know, unique skill. I personally wouldn't bother with new material unless you think their entire case is resting on this like one proposition, and you have this perfect piece of rebuttal that would just completely destroy their case and make you win over them because their case is now defunct and cannot stand. In that case, yes, POI them with the piece of rebuttal and make the piece of rebuttal in your POI. That usually doesn't happen. So the best thing to do is after you've kind of done your speech, try and get out of your kind of partisan mindset and think like the judge is thinking. Really try to evaluate your case against theirs, look at the clashes between them, and think about where the kind of pinch points are, where one case would flip over the other, like, you know, where it would be hard for the judge to resolve a certain clash because there hasn't been enough engagement, like where the result could flip over. And you need to identify those particular points and ask a POI that engages with that point and demonstrates in the POI how your case defeats theirs. So it can be quite good to do like a statement followed by a question in order to get enough information out, but of course, making sure it is only 15 seconds. If you're feeling really confident and you think you're already winning and you would like to win more, you can kind of say like, we told you this, please engage. But that is, that is a risky technique, because it can backfire and they think, oh yeah, I will respond to that. And then they defeat your case with the response. So danger. But if you say, we told you this, please engage, and they go, and then gives a really crap response, then the judge will be like, oh yeah, that like PM speech was really good. I remember that point. Yeah, these guys do get the first. So, if you think you're like definitely winning, but it seems like the judge is forgetting about your case, potentially a strategy, but be aware of the risks of it. I think that's it. I did put a little video of this. It's an error. I'll get the link. I'll post a link in the comments if you want to watch this opening. Sydney v Sydney. I've been informed it's very good opening. And when I opened the YouTube link, I had watched the opening, but I don't remember it. But it must have been good. So if you would like to see these techniques, hopefully in action, and you can click on the link in the description box below. Please like and subscribe to the University of Auckland Facebook channel for new videos every week, and subscribe to our Patreon. Now it's time for an ad from Skillshare, Nordstrom, VPN, and etc. And Audible. Yeah, thank you. I don't actually know how to stop the live stream, so. Oh, that's